Creating a safe home environment. One of the first things you need to look at is define how much risk you're willing to live with. This disease is a balance between risk and independence, and you have to decide how much risk you're willing to live with. We're going to look at some of the safety issues both inside and immediately outside the home, hoping for you to be able to come up with ideas for basic solutions when you identify these challenges, and then have the wherewithal to recognize when it's really time to bring in a professional for assessment and evaluation. With this particular population, dealing with safety, we really are talking about preventing the crisis from occurring rather than dealing with the crisis after it's occurred. And I think it's really important for all of you to recognize that what we want to do is minimize danger, and that helps maximize their independence. There are things we're going to talk about that you can build into the home that will reduce the danger and therefore allow your loved one to be more independent. And then finally, this concept is a tough one to remember, but when you do, you'll have one of those aha moments, and that is that it's more effective to change the environment than to change your loved one's behaviors through your instruction. I want you now to think just in general terms how dementia affects safety, because you need to look at the areas of impairment, and once you examine those areas, you'll begin to yourself realize why safety becomes such an issue. First of all, remember that dementia is occurring up in the brain. There are a number of different kinds of dementia, and the area that is impacted in the brain will affect how they respond and consequently how safety is impacted. So first of all, I think probably all of you would acknowledge that judgment is something that is impaired. So things that your loved one would never have considered doing before all of a sudden become an easy thing to do without even considering that it's wrong. I mean, and we'll talk about this later, it could be you want to heat something up, so you put a styrofoam cup on the stove and turn on the stove. One sees that there's a stove and they know they want to heat, but the judgment is impaired. With dementia, you lose a sense of time and place, which is one of the reasons that we end up having wandering, but we'll get into that later. Dementia also brings on a number of behaviors, and all of you are dealing with those behaviors, whether it's them not wanting to do something or over-responding. Those are all issues. You will also find with dementia that their physical ability is diminished. And we're going to address that in just a second. And then finally, their senses. Not only the sense of vision, but hearing, the sense of touch, visual spatial issues. There are lots of issues with their senses that all will affect how they can safely be in their home. We're going to turn now for a second. This is my tower of risk. And you'll see the different issues that are listed there. Balance, mobility, multiple medications, blood pressure, sensory deficits, and home hazards. Any one of those steps in this tower, when they are out of kilter, will increase the risk of falls. And it's so important for you to be aware of those particular risks is that when those occur, you are likely then to end up with some other issues, such as broken hips, that you don't want to be dealing with. One of the things that was so interesting, this came out of a study from Yale University, and they found that by teaching this tower of risk, were able to reduce falls by, I believe it's 70%. Now, when you look at those, some of those issues are things that you can control. Certainly home hazards you can control. Balance problems is something that we can look at. Some of the others are going to be more difficult, but As you look at them, you are going to, for instance, we've had the pharmacist come and speak to us and talk about medications. Multiple medications can really increase the risk of falls. So you may need to talk to your pharmacist, sit down and talk to them about, are some of these medications going to cause my loved one to fall? Low blood pressure can be caused also by medication, but also some folks just have it. The reason you want to be aware of low blood pressure is you may need to help your loved one not just get up real quickly and start moving after they've slept all night. Instead, they need to sit on the side of the bed and dangle their feet, begin to equalize their blood pressure, and then get up. The sensory deficits are really critical because depth perception. This may be why you're having trouble getting your loved one into a bathtub, because they look in the tub and it looks like a deep, dark hole, and they can't see where the bottom of the tub is. They also have a decreased sensation to temperature, which we'll cover in a little while. And certainly, home hazards is something that we really can have a major effect on, and that's when you become the detective and start walking around the house looking. And I would suggest that if you did one thing today, it would be go home and start an exercise program. It may be, if you're finding that they're having trouble following the directions, you do it next to them or across from them so that they can mirror what you're doing. And that's where you begin to, again, be the detective and look at, why is this not working? Is it because they can't follow auditorily what I'm saying? And that's when you then do them in front of them. And you'll find often if you say, you know, the doctor says I need to do these exercises, let's do them together rather than you need to do it. So much has to do with approach and whether or not you're going to be able to accomplish what you're wanting to accomplish. Next, we turn to safety observations. And this is where you need to become the observer or the detective. What worked when you were younger or when your loved one did not have cognitive impairment may not work now. So you look at the physical environment and determine how it matches up with your loved one. Is there too much clutter? You need to begin to look at the home through the eyes of your loved one is what you need to do. Our nurse Ann says that when we go to a home with someone who has dementia, especially if they're living there by themselves, you'll find the overgrown bushes, things just are a little out of kilter, just like their whole life is a little out of kilter. And you as the caregivers need to be tuned into that, because if you do have someone who is living alone, they become the prime target for scams. And that's pretty scary. So that's something that you want to be aware of. When you go inside the home, how is the temperature? Sometimes I'll go into a home and it may be 90 outside, but it's got to be at least 110 inside. And part of that is because there's something that happens with the regulatory system with our folks, and they just like it hot. But sometimes they are not aware of the temperature, and they will become dehydrated, which many of you know. When our folks become dehydrated, then you have another whole set of behaviors occurring. So you want to keep them hydrated, and one way is to certainly keep the temperature down. Obviously, another way is to drink more. What is the general condition inside the home? Are there tripping obstacles? Frequently I will go in a home, and if it's hot, they'll have extension cords stretched across doorways so that they have their fans on. You don't want that. You don't want throw rugs. Are there odors in the home? And this is more for those of you that are going into perhaps your parents' home. Well, even if you live there yourself, but that can indicate that something is going on that you need to look further at. Smoke detectors, which seem so obvious, is something you really need to think about. I can't tell you how many homes I go into that will have the smoke detector, but it will be hanging open because they need to replace the battery. Make sure that those batteries are operational, because truly fires are one of my big fears in these homes, because again, judgment is impaired. Look at the stairs. Are there railings? And I always like to watch the individual climb the steps. Do they hold on to the railing? If there's only a railing on one side, are they starting to turn and holding on to that single railing with both sides? Because if they are, they're likely to trip over it and fall. So you need to become, again, the observant detective. And then finally, how are medications organized and dispensed? Many of our folks do not like to have someone else telling them they need to take their medications, especially early on. But if they're in a med box, at least you can see if they've been taken or not. Because what we find is, frequently, they'll say, yes, I took them, and they haven't been taken. Or they'll say no, and then they take a double dose. And either way, it's not a good thing. So in the beginning, certainly the medication box helps keep you and them aware of what's happening. You know, as the disease progresses, using just a little cup that you might put in front of their orange juice each morning, so that you still aren't putting it in their mouth, but at least you are having it there and it's in front of them, and you know, it's that insight, out of sight, out of mind, or if it's in sight, in view, they will take it. So keep that in mind. But you need to become the keeper of the medications and the person who's really making sure they're being given. Some of the medications our folks are on are really strong medications, so you do need to be cautious. It's not like taking a vitamin, and you want to be very aware of how those are being handled. Okay, so we're going to look now at some of the safety general solutions. In every home you go into, there are going to be hazardous areas. So what are you going to do with them? Are you going to clean them out completely? Can you lock them up? Can you somehow disguise them? What I suggest is that you look very carefully at what is poisonous. If it has to be there, then create a cupboard where you keep things that are poisonous that has a lock on it. If your loved one likes to rummage, well, don't say to them, no, you can't rummage, but just have them have a drawer that's their rummage drawer. And again, lock the things that you need to be kept in certain places. So it's kind of using common sense, but it's a matter of you being the regulator, but without your loved one feeling like you've taken control over everything. And that's the fine balance that you're working towards, is to accomplish that without making them feel like you are now ruling, because that doesn't work so well. Also be prepared for emergencies. Do you have the police, the fire, the hospital, and poison control numbers right there? Nowadays you can kind of just dial 911 and you pretty much can get all of those things taken care of at once. But it's important to have them posted, especially if your loved one lives alone and you might be a child that is taking care of someone, because when we go in the home and I ask just a question, what would you do in case of a fire? Some of them honestly do not have any idea, or they'll say, well, I'll call the fire department, and I'll say, oh, well, how would you do that? And kind of walk them through it. The caregiver then realizes that they really don't know. So sometimes if you just have 911 posted by each phone, it serves as a visual reminder. It's what we call cueing. That works certainly earlier in the disease. Later in the disease, that doesn't work so well. Walkways. If any of you live in older homes, this may or may not be the case, but I've found it seems as though the older homes do not have lighting on the stairways. And that can be a real issue, because our folks already are having some problems with their visual sense. And if it's dark, then it makes it even more difficult. So use night lights. I have a gadget here that I think is really kind of nifty. It was meant to be used in a closet, but it is a motion detector that when there's motion, it turns on. And it's run by a battery, so you can actually have it halfway up the stairs, and as someone's going up, it will light up, and then the pathway is lit. So I have found sometimes if you just go to the hardware store and tell them the kind of thing you're looking for, and I always say, well, you know, I work with people with memory loss. If you have someone who's not too busy and who loves their job, they really will spend time helping you find some really good gadgets that are worthwhile. So, but use of a light, night lights frequently help. You may need, if they're getting confused at night and getting up in the to the bathroom and you're upstairs, you may want to put a gate at the top of the stairs. And if it's just a child's gate and it's pressure, just set it so that it's higher rather than down low, so that if they won't fall over it, but at least they are guided that that is not the direction they want to be going in the middle of the night. Bathrooms are where many serious accidents occur. So you really want to look at, first of all, the general condition of the bathroom. Observe how your loved one gets in and out of the tub. I have found, you know, with some people in the senior generation apparently don't go into the bathroom when their loved one is, so they say, well, I have no idea how they get in and out of the tub. And I say, well, you just kind of need to start peeking in and seeing how that process is occurring, because first of all, it may not be occurring. We found one gentleman said, well, she takes a bath every night. And so I had her show me how she got in the tub. She had no idea. She got on her hands and knees and started trying to crawl over it. It was apparent that she had not done it for some time. What was kind of humorous in a strange sort of way was that she would turn the water on so he'd hear the water running, but if he had been the thorough detective, he would have realized that her towels were never damp. So she was at least starting, but just couldn't complete the task. So you need to observe, how are they getting in? So be observant about that. The other side on the commode is that with our folks who have these visual perception problems, if you have a white bathroom with white floor, a white toilet, a white sink, and you're having visual problems, you may not be able to differentiate where the two are, or all of those things are, where the toilet is. In fact, if it's a male and there is also a white wastebasket, we find frequently they will use the wastebasket because it's circular and it looks like the toilet. So you don't want any extraneous things in the bathroom, and you want to clearly demark what the toilet is. Some folks will actually just get a different colored toilet seat so that they will know that's where the toilet is, or paint the wall behind it a different color, just so that it becomes obvious where the toilet is. That's one of those visual things that you don't usually think about, but when you start having the accident, you kind of think, well, now, why is that occurring? In the bedroom, what is the condition of the bedroom? Are they able to get in and out of bed without difficulty? For getting in and out of the bed, one of the things I really like, and again, I didn't get here with it, it's called a bed cane, and there's a board that slides under the mattress, and then a cane comes up on the side of the bed. And if they're having trouble getting out of the bed, this allows them to hold on to it. I find it great because you can also, at that time, position yourself. If you have trouble with people falling out of bed, I know there are regulations in assisted living that you can't use bed rails, but you can use this bed bar because you tell them that it's an assist for getting out of bed. And then if they go to roll, they'll run into this bed bar and not fall out. So it serves a number of purposes, but it's a very easy gadget and can save you a lot of anxiety. The other reason that it works so well is when they go to stand up from the bed, you know, mini beds are kind of squishy, and so when they go to push down to get up, they don't have a firm balance. But if you can be holding onto this bar to get out of the bed, you're less likely again to have a fall, which is obviously what our concern is. Are the closets overflowing? That's something that also deals with helping to support their level of functioning. I really suggest that you remove things based on the season and eliminate the number of choices. That's not so much a safety issue, but our folks have a really tough time making decisions. So if they're choosing from 30 outfits to put on versus 5, they'll do a lot better if you just have 5. And if you remove the out-of-season clothing, then it's less likely for them to have a mistake. And anytime we can have them be successful without it appearing that we are controlling their life, it's a good thing. So that's something that I would suggest. The piles of laundry, again, frequently just become a tripping hazard. Sometimes the homes we go into, it reminds you of a teenage room where, people take things off and drop them on the floor rather than getting them where they belong. So you need to be aware of that. Basements. Basements are one of those areas where I say, stay out. And usually that's because, at least in many of the older homes that I go into, they are open stairways. They may or may not have a railing or a sturdy railing. They're dark, and they have a very hard floor at the bottom of the basement. So I recommend, if you don't need to be down there, don't. If you are caring for someone who's out of town, how do you deal with that? Are you willing to be of assistance? And probably more important, are you willing to ask other people to help you? I know asking for help is a hard thing to do, but once you do, you're going to feel it will give you relief, it will give you help reduce your stress, and certainly will make you, in the long run, a better caregiver. Have you worked at learning to understand some of the attitudes and behaviors of your loved one? And some of these areas, once you begin to get these, you will get a sense on how to help with their safety. And then, are there physical safety concerns that do you fear for yourself? Every once in a while we'll get, and this doesn't happen often, we have someone who becomes a little bit violent, or they become threatening. And are you comfortable with dealing with them? I mean, if it's a husband who's 200 and some pounds and you're 98 pounds, how are you going to deal with it? Another reason to always carry a cell phone with you. Sometimes it's a matter of, if they are really agitated, just turning your body sideways so that they don't have as much to hit if they are getting into the hitting mode, and certainly removing yourself from the situation until it can become more safe is an important thing to do. We're going to look a little bit at what we call the instrumental activities of daily living. Those are the activities that require a higher level of cognitive functioning. Frequently, dealing with money is one of the first areas that we begin to see problems, or the family will begin to note problems. But as caregivers, it is just so important for you to be aware of that, because we've had some families get into some really serious financial trouble because their loved one had always done the finances and did not want any help, and all of a sudden bills weren't being paid, insurance policies were lapsing. So as the caregiver, if you are just in the beginning of all this, you want to be aware of whether or not they are able to handle that, and how you can kind of start to become involved. Make sure your name is on the bank account. Make sure that you are checking if you're online, checking the account to make sure there aren't large withdrawals coming out. Are they able to grocery shop? Are they able to prepare foods? Are they able to do some of those activities that require a higher level of cognitive functioning? These are the basic activities of daily living. Feeding, toileting yourself, eating. And we find that our folks, as the disease progresses, begin to have more and more trouble with that, safety-wise. But again, as the caregivers, you can assist without taking over completely. And although it takes more energy to assist, it gives them a much higher quality of life, and that's what your goal is. Now we're going to spend a little time talking about wandering. I don't know how many of you have dealt with wandering. If your loved one wanders, would anybody know that they have left? 6 in 10 people with dementia will wander. So that's 60%. Think about that. What can we do to help if wandering occurs? What can we do to help prevent the wandering? And what usually I will have is a person say, well, they never wandered. And I'll say, well, that's great, but we want to make sure that doesn't happen. Again, I'm into prevention, and that's what you want to do. So we try to identify who's the person that's going to wander, and I don't think there are any rules to that, but this is a list that kind of may indicate that you're having someone who's beginning to get lost. If they go out for a drive or a walk and it takes them longer than usual. Sometimes it's people who have worked for years and they say they're going to work and they get going, but then they don't know where they're going. And then many of you have probably already dealt with, I want to go home, even if they're at home. And sometimes one solution, we were talking about this the other night, is merely to get them in the car and drive around the block and come back home and they're okay. Other times that doesn't work as well, but there is that wanting to go home. Another indicator is if someone is pacing and just anxious, their engines are moving but they don't know what to do. Frequently you can deal with that by just going for a walk or give them an activity that is a repetitive, no-fail activity, but helps take care of that anxiousness that they're having. Sometimes wandering occurs if they have difficulty finding familiar places. It might be finding the bathroom, finding a bedroom. It could even be if they go out not recognizing that their home is their home and they go on down the street still looking for it. Some of the solutions is to determine if they are going to be at risk for wandering. Obviously, if someone is wheelchair bound, that's not so much an issue as someone who is very spry and has always walked and has always been active, but at this point is cognitively not aware of their surroundings. Identify the times of day that it may occur so that you are more watchful. Exercise, that's always great. You want to monitor reactions to medications. And if they are wandering, use direction to redirect them and help focus them. Let's go this way rather than don't go that way. So it's a matter of helping them be redirected without you being too negative. Those are things you can do in response to the individual, but in dealing with the home, what are some of the things you can do? Certainly have night lights on. Locks are important because it's dangerous, especially if they're getting out at night. There is something also through the Alzheimer's Association called Comfort Zone, which is a little more technical, and it appears that the caregiver has to have the computer and they can monitor exactly where the individual is going. But that technology is changing all the time. Think about security gates. Those are important just around your house. The other day I was at a home where the gal, once the weather gets nice, to keep her locked inside seemed so terrible. They had put up a security gate so that she could go out on the porch, but they knew she couldn't then leave. There are some people that will never leave the house without their hat. Some ladies won't ever leave the house without their purse. Some people won't ever leave the house without their shoes. This is certainly a basic way of helping to care for this, but if you remove what we call the trigger items, those items, and put them out of sight, if they can't find their hat, their purse, their shoes, or whatever, they are not as likely to leave.